Welcome to this course on some basic facts about essential oils. Today we're going to be looking at the question, why plant-based medicine? But first I want to take you into just a quick historical insight out of Clinical Aromatherapy, an amazing book by Jane Buckle, where she just describes that really in around 1910, there was a short period of years where homeopathic and naturopathic information was scrubbed out of medical schools. Herbal medicines was excluded from the curricula. Drug companies became major underwriters for colleges. The American Medical Association and 90% of medical research. We're going to look at some of how that happened in our society. But first, let's look at really what is the difference between essential oil and synthetic drugs. Essential oils have a multidimensional, intelligent chemistry that adapts to body conditions. Synthetic drugs, on the other hand, are one-dimensional. They are programmed to perform actions in the body and do not alter that activity even when bodily conditions change. They just keep doing what they were doing even if it's no longer beneficial. So you can see quite easily when you look at this difference why a plant-based medicine might be more useful in labor and delivery, where physiological swings in the mother can turn sharply, especially in the third stage of labor, and produce fatal outcomes. Essential oils not only trigger their own biotransformation, their own chemical modification within the organism of the body, typically with the help of enzymes. The process is also highly dynamic and is based on the unique physical conditions of the body. So they're just filled with this homeostatic intelligence, and are able to nourish the body and restore the body to a state of health, and they may stimulate or repress enzymes. They change their function based on the environment of the body. Another thing, some people believe that everything is relative, but if you are a person who believes that truth and light is better than darkness and falsehood, when you put a lot of these synthetic drugs into your body, they are intentionally designed to send misinformation to cells or to block certain receptor sites from cellular communication in order to trick the body into giving up symptoms. They often disrupt cellular memory, they depress the immune system, and they lead towards dependence and chronic disease. So if you are a person who cares about truth, realize that a lot of synthetic drugs that you put into the body are literally designed to suppress the truth of what's going on, and and are really symptom management. Essential oils, in contrast, these are wild crafted, and this may be an unpopular opinion, but I actually don't believe that a natural oil is the same thing as a lab synthesized oil. So when, for example, plant therapy or Young Living is caught and told, by the courts to pay for adulterating oils with the same structural formula as what's distilled in plants, but for example, you have an alcohol linalool constituent that's made in the laboratory. I don't believe that just because something has the same molecular formula that it is bioavailable and therapeutically relevant within the body. And so there are some essential oil companies that put synthetic chemical constituents in their oils, and really only one that doesn't. And adulteration, by the way, is different from contamination. So if a farmer has a distillery process and there's plastic involved, you can have normally adulteration is intentional and contamination is unintentional. But I was able to meet the top essential oil chemist in the world from Nepal, and I don't want to overblow the connection. We only had a brief, like maybe 20-minute conversation. But he does research on the bioavailability of essential oils, and shows in multiple images and all of the data how a lab synthesized oil constituent does not do the same thing in the body as a wild crafted oil. And so I've really come to be convinced, and many top chemists in essential oils are convinced, that a synthetic synthesized oil with an identical structural formula is not the same thing as an essential oil that's been wildcrafted. So let's look at secondary plant metabolites. These are physiologically active by design, and just because we can give a chemical formula to it doesn't mean that it's the same. Secondary plant metabolites play incredible roles of communication. They signal to other plants and insects. The full scope of their activities and interactions with life on our planet is something that we're just discovering now, one that's being fought tooth and nail, not only by major essential oil companies, but also the representatives of chemical, pharmaceutical, fragrant, flavor, and food industries. And they really do just have multi-component mixtures that are wilds, that are natural, have incredible advantage over single or synthetic component drugs. And this really has to do with how essential oils work, is because they really modify electric cell signaling by inserting themselves into the lipid membranes of cells, and can really change a cell's permeability, its structure, and its functionality. So when an oil is dynamic and it's able to do that in a way that ensures benefit for the body, you're approaching an entirely different level and really understanding of medicine. And another way that it works is by attaching to membrane or receptor proteins, and this modifies again the membrane's functionality. And so really the basis of aromatherapy has its foundations in the chemical constituents that have a chemical intelligence that speaks to the human organism. And they do this in a unique way based on their chemistry, their weight, their light refraction, their polarity, and electrical qualities. But a great way to really think about what they do is it really is a plant-based language. There is a chemical intelligence that is transferred into all biological systems of the multidimensional human body at every level. And they're not just complex in terms of their chemistry. As we said, they could have over 100 different chemical constituents. They have a whole range of interesting properties that makes them really vibrant. And I mean, one way that isn't an oversimplified way of speaking is that aromatherapy really is a form of communication with plants. And they have different electromagnetic frequencies or vibrational signatures. This is again not lab synthesized, but actual plant-based, distilled from plants medicine. They have electromagnetic frequencies, vibrational signatures. Some have higher megahertz reading than others. They have electrical properties that are defined of positive and negative polarity. A single aroma molecule, it could be negative and polar, or negative and nonpolar. And again, this affects how it works in the body. And our dosing recommendations are based on all of this information, based on the molecular weight and their optical activity. Some rotate when you put light in, some rotate clockwise, some counterclockwise. So this is the type of information about essential oil that we now have the capacity to know whether or not you have lab synthesized chemical constituents that have been added into the essential oil. And a lot of it is based on the molecular weight and the optical rotational activity of the essential oil, is how they're able to detect these very sophisticated adulteration methods that's used by companies like we don't, maybe we don't have to say names, but the point is that all of these components together, when you have a living medicine, there's a crystalline structure. They work alongside of the human body. And what are some of the things that they do? They have all of these different properties of how they work in the body, and one oil could have multiple effects that are used in this way. And really the takeaway here that I would leave you with is just this verse out of a book that I have not read. I'm going to just throw that out there. But I found this quote. I loved it. And it said, "The Lord hath created medicines out of the earth, and he is wise that will not despise them." And really just attuning our heart to wisdom here, just the humility that plants have grown up in our environment for thousands of years and have been interacting over long periods of time in our environment, and now we have these synthetic drugs where we really don't even know what they do in the body, how they affect the environment around us, how they affect our relationships, our mental states, our cellular states. And with plenty of examples of disease and dis-ease in our midst and in our environment, um, I think it would be wise to not despise or not to look down on the gifts of plants. And on that note, let's look at the reductionist limitation, because in the reductionist experiment mindset, all the variables are kept at a constant order and they only study the one active ingredient. This is how they study single component drugs such as aspirin. But when an essential oil is being looked at, there are hundreds of components that contribute to the therapeutic result. And the problem is that if the experiment can't find one constituent that causes the results that they claim the oil makes, they say that they say that the claim isn't scientifically verifiable. So for example, lavender being used for burns is, something that all oil users know is very highly effective. But if a pharmacologist can't figure out what the active ingredient is that mimics the effect of the whole oil, then they say, well, the oil doesn't work, again, because they have this mindset of like a single active ingredient. Another example of this is the effects of oils on bacteria. Essential oils impair bacteria by multiple physiological systems and altering membrane functionality, but there's not one constituent that does that. So this was kind of what I was getting at before, and I didn't realize I had pulled this quote from medical aromatherapy. He just says what I just said, which is that every single molecule found in essential oil has been a part of the complex development of life on planet Earth, and many biological processes. They interact harmoniously with all biological systems at once, with the combined effect being highly favorable. Synthetics, on the contrary, have not proven themselves on any substantial timescale, and many of the approval processes are simply not capable of predicting even short-term effects. So pharmacology is really just the study of actions and effects of drugs on living organisms, and there's really two branches that are relevant in our study. One is pharmacokinetics, what the drug does to the body, and pharmacodynamics, what the drug does. I had them both here. So I'm sorry. Pharmacokinetics is actually how the drug enters the body and interacts with the body. And then pharmacodynamics is then what the drug does within the body. And part of the reason why we have lab synthesized medicines is because the means of production can be controlled: volume, timing. Synthetic or chemically, genetically engineered substances have only one or two active ingredients, usually one, and every batch is the same. And it's just very, very difficult to create essential oils. And so really there's only one company that's working with multi-generational artesian farmers for their oils, not growing fields of lavender in Utah, but lavender should come from climates and altitudes where it grows best, places like France or Bulgaria. And they'll say, well, you can't be a part-time pioneer. Like, getting oils is very complex. It's not just what does our marketing team say the demand is going to be this year, and you pump out that one ingredient and everything's controlled. It's very difficult to create plant-based medicines. And in addition to that, it's also illegal to patent any natural product. And so it's a lot easier to make big profits in the medical industry by creating an unnatural substance to patent it. And that's why when synthetic drugs are created, active components, which are oftentimes first discovered in plants, they're isolated from their molecular environment, oftentimes chemically altered, and this enables them to be patented and mass-produced, not grown. Now, unfortunately, the feedback loops are eliminated, and a classic example of this isolation and modification is the cocaine molecule that turns the cocoa plant into crack, which is obviously not a step in the right direction. Plants themselves are highly dynamic. They communicate. They protect themselves against plant-eating animals, bacteria, fungi, viruses, and are really so dynamic. And it's really well known that bacteria pathogens develop resistance to conventional antibiotics. And this is a consequence of the narrow focus and single active ingredient of antibiotics. They're highly selective. They inhibit a single mechanism in the form of metabolism of the pathogen or something like that. And when a microorganism has changed just enough to survive the antibiotic, it then replicates freely. Essential oils, on the other hand, are fundamentally different. They have non-selective activity, which makes it practically impossible for a microorganism to develop any type of resistance. And they're just, how they attack is the microorganism can't survive. It can't just have a slight mutation. When its membrane is being attacked by essential oils, the microorganism simply needs its membrane. And so essential oils work very comprehensively. Many have over 150 isolated chemical constituents, which again, I'm not talking about lab synthesized chemical constituents that are adulterated, but plant-based medicine. There is a therapeutic property of essential oils that can do multiple different things in the body. And we tend to organize them in families. And I wanted to put here just so you could see the different oils, some of which we teach in this course, that have similar molecular structures that are enough that they have similar types of activities in the body and similar effects. Here you have the different families and some of the things that they do. But really a top chemist in the field, Joyce Bowles, she says that she's not even a proponent of the idea that all chemical constituents in a particular category share certain properties. And so part of this is because by conservative estimates, 80% of essential oils currently on the market are contaminated and or adulterated. And the adulteration of essential oils with lab synthesized chemical constituents is well documented and undisputed. And so I just would really encourage you to join the bandwagon of people who believe that these are different, and I'm going to be showing more images in future lessons about this. But in my conversation with one of the, I would say, the top chemist in the world with essential oils, really by the time I finished talking with him, it was kind of awkward because he's like the stereotypical like kind of awkward chemist. And I was crying in our meeting. And finally, he just stops and he's like, you know, wanting to ask, why are you crying? And it's because I was crying because when I was looking at his research and the way that he had developed a technology so that you could tell what had been adulterated and not and how it moved in the body or not, that really is the first step towards using plants as medicine and integrating them into a healthcare system where you have to have demonstrable benefits consistently over time in order for insurance companies to pay for the medicine. And third-party payment is a whole nother issue. But you know what? Let's just stick with what we have for this lesson, and we'll get into some of that stuff at later points. So I would invite you to honor plant-based medicine as being a truthful, helpful, dynamic, proven communication art, as being fundamentally different from other types of quote medicine in the body. And so let's just talk really briefly about some practical information that you're going to need to know in order to work with and store your plant-based medicine. I want to just take you quickly through how essential oils can become oxidized, and this happens when they're exposed to air, heat, or UV light. It's difficult to predict which essential oils will act as haptens in the body, but oxidized essential oils are more prone to induce allergic reactions, and this happens again when they're exposed to air. And so you should always store them in darker colored bottles and keep them in a temperature controlled and ideally dark environment. Many essential oils that I'm storing for long-term use, or I have a bottle and I get another bottle of it, I will put that bottle in the refrigerator, but you certainly don't have to store them there. Just anywhere that's out of direct light or heat, like don't store them over your stove or in front of a really hot window. Essential oils that are more likely to cause a sensitization if they are oxidized include these oils that I have laid out here for you. And even under ideal conditions, essential oils don't last forever. So you might want to consider discarding open bottles of essential oils after these time frames. For most essential oils, it's 2 to 3 years. I know I'm going through this pretty fast, but all of this information is in your download at the end. And then let's talk about how do you know when an oil is oxidized? Well, citrus oils might become cloudy or develop a sentiment at the bottom. Oils that were originally blue will turn slightly greenish. But keep in mind that there won't be a significant difference and that oxidation takes place gradually. It can be really hard to perceive the change in odor without comparing the essential oil to a freshly opened bottle. So just keep in mind that oftentimes an oil won't smell, it's not going to smell rancid, first of all, and it may not even smell significantly different. So just be aware of these timelines, which I have in the download that's accompanying this class. And then make sure that you also download your client script swipe file, because being able to articulate some of the facts in this course are very distinguishing for professionals to be able to explain the why behind your recommendations. And so that's why we craft client scripts for you, because I heard it, or I believe that, or I like that isn't the same thing as I can professionally articulate that to my clients. So please take these client scripts and make them yours, and don't miss the download with this information on how to work with your plant-based medicines and store them and knowing when to discard them. Thank you so much for having a little bit of a dive into why plant-based medicine, essential oil facts for people who care, and I will see you in the next course. Thanks for your attention. See you soon.